Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah.
Alhamdulillah, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah. Praise be to God. I bear witness that there is no God but God, and He has no partners. We know from the Quran that God reminds us through various verses that we have to be focused on our goal and purpose of existence in this world. Unlike most people, by the grace of God, we are blessed with the knowledge of our purpose and the reason for our existence in this world. Most of the people out there are unaware. They do not take heed. They are heedless of the reason why we exist on this earth. We learn from the Quran that the purpose of our existence in this earthly plane is simply to worship God and God alone, without setting up any partners besides Him. So it is very important, it is paramount that we are focused on our goal and never be distracted from our purpose. And that is why we see many verses in the Quran that reminds us not to be distracted from our real purpose of existence. For example, in Surah 3 verse 152, God says, God has fulfilled His promise to you and you defeated them by His leave. But then you wavered, disputed among yourselves, and disobeyed after He had shown you the victory you had longed for. But then some of you became distracted by the spoils of this world, while others were rightly concerned with the hereafter. He then diverted you from them to test you. He has pardoned you. God showers the believers with His grace. So here God is giving an example of a situation where some believers, by God's help, by His leave, they were able to defeat their enemy, but some of them became distracted by the spoils of this world. Whatever they got after the war, with victory comes spoils. You get a lot of material wealth, especially after a war. There's a lot of material wealth that comes into your control. So if a person is focused on the hereafter, that's why God says, while others were rightly concerned with the hereafter, such material possessions or gains will never distract them. Whereas if our focus is not proper, whenever we acquire anything, whenever we gain something, we will be distracted. And today we live in a world where there is numerous distractions. Some very simple distractions to very huge distractions. It is actually very hard for people to have or focus on anything because you're constantly distracted. Even getting our salah done on time is becoming a more of a challenge because of so many distractions. That's why God says you have to be reverent, you have to constantly remember God. And God says for such individuals it is not difficult. So God reminds us in this world that regardless of what we acquire, whatever material possessions we have, we should never be distracted. So how do we know if we are distracted? What is an indication that we are distracted by this material world or this physical world? clearly the first indicator is that we rarely remember God. We rarely remember God. If God is not the most important thought about God, is not what is there in our mind throughout our day, that is a clear indication that we are distracted. So we can always self-examine ourselves. What is occupying our mind? If it is our jobs, if it is something that we is a business, family, whatever other commitments we may have, if that is what is dominating our thoughts, then that is the number one sign that we are distracted by this worldly life. And also, so this is why what we learn from this example where God says they were distracted by the spoils of the world. Whatever they were getting, they were eager to get more, while others were rightly concerned with the hereafter. So what is the situation of those individuals who also gained spoils of war, but they were rightly concerned about the hereafter? It never changed them. Whatever possessions that came, they also gained something, right? In that group, there are people who were rightly concerned about the hereafter, and then there were some who were distracted. So, but both of them gained the same thing. They all got the spoils of war. But what was the difference? The difference was that it didn't change those who were rightly concerned about the hereafter. They still remained as they were. How it was before the war and after the war, those individuals did not change. So this is how we should be in our life. We may also come across situations where we get material gain. We get a new job, we get more success in our business, we may have more children, many such gains may come, but it should not distract us at all. We should always remember that God expects us to be rightly concerned with the hereafter. And in Surah 5 verse 91, God says, "The devil wants to provoke animosity and hatred among you through intoxicants and gambling, and to distract you from remembering God and from observing the contact prayers. Will you then refrain?" So here God is giving us another example of how we get distracted. First, we know that we get distracted because of the spoils of this world, whatever material possessions. And God says that the devil will provoke us through intoxicants and gambling, and to distract you from remembering God and from observing the contact prayers. So there are many such things that exist in this world, such as intoxicants and gambling, that will also be used by the devil to distract us from remembering God. So that is why God is asking, will you then refrain? So whatever that we feel is distracting us from remembering God, we have to keep away from it. And we see that example in the case of Prophet Solomon, who was distracted, who failed to observe his afternoon prayer because he was distracted by his material possession, which were his horses, and he let them go. So you can see how much of an importance he was placing on remembering God, because he knew the importance of it. If material possessions, whatever it may be, distracts us, then that means we are losing, both here in this world and in the hereafter. And another indication of us losing focus is that we fail to observe the contact prayers. If we miss prayers, of course we make tawbah, we repent. However, we should also understand that when we miss prayers, we are distracted. Something distracted us. Something caused us to fail in observing that contact prayers. So contact prayers can be used as a yardstick to see how distracted you are. If you are occupied with something, you will miss your prayer if you are distracted. That's for sure. It's designed in that way. That is why, and it will be very difficult for you also. That's why God says it is only easy for those who are reverent. So if you have God dominating your thoughts throughout the day, you will be able to observe your contact prayers. But if there are deadlines that are distracting you, if there are material gains, business, something that you're placing importance on more than that you are actually supposed to, that will reflect on your observance of the contact prayers. You will fail at some point. So that is something that we have to immediately catch ourselves on and understand that, okay, if I missed my prayer, it means something distracted me. Could be my phone, as simple as your phone, some scrolling up and down, or business, or even any stuff that you're doing in your life. So that is why God says that these things the devil will use to distract us from remembering God. And then God speaks about the true believers. They never lose focus. God says that in Surah 24 verse 37, people who are not distracted by business or trade from commemorating God, they observe the contact prayers and give the obligatory charity, and they are conscious of the day when the minds and the eyes will be horrified. So this is the description of people who are not at all distracted. But they are doing business. God says they are doing business. They are also doing trade. But God says that never distracts them. They continue commemorating God, and they observe the contact prayers and give the obligatory charity. And they are conscious, they are aware of the day when the minds and the eyes will be horrified. So this is the kind of people that we should become. Quran teaches us that very clearly, that despite being very busy with business, despite having deadlines, despite having customers to deal with, despite having many things to do, people to please, people to satisfy, people to attend to, deals to make, they never fail, they're never distracted by any of that. They still rush to commemorating God. They go for their prayers. Even this Jummah is also a time that shows, if we fail to consistently observe our Friday prayers, that is another indication of us being distracted by this world. Because if someone is not distracted, he or she will do as the Quran commands us to do, which is to drop all business, drop all your commitments, and rush to the remembrance of God. So these are our indicators of how distracted we are and how distracted we are not from remembering God. And in Surah 31 verse 33, God reminds us, O people, you shall reverence your Lord and fear a day when a father cannot help his own child, nor a child can help his father. Certainly God's promise is truth. Therefore, do not be distracted by this life. Do not be distracted from God by mere illusions. So there are a couple of things that God reminds us in this particular verse. One is that He tells us to reverence God, reverence Him, and also fear of the last day, the day when we will all be held accountable for our actions. So remembering God is very important, and also being fearful of a day that we will be held accountable is also very important. And God goes on to explain, when a father cannot help his own child, nor a child can help his father. So we have to think, like, why is God giving this example? Why is God saying when a father cannot help his own child, nor a child can help his father? Why is that? Because both depend on each other in this worldly life, right? A father takes care of the child, so the child is dependent on the father. When the father becomes old, the child becomes the support for the father. That's what we see generally. Of course, there are exceptions. Generally, that's what we see in a human life. That's what happens. The father takes care of the child when the child is weak and helpless. Then when the child grows up and when the father becomes old, the child starts supporting the father. But God says on that particular day, people who used to depend on whoever that may be, a father or a child or a mother, that will not exist. That will be completely forgotten on that particular day, on the day of judgment. So God is telling us that on that day, a father who is standing in front of God will never be bothered about the child, not even think about the child. Here now, suddenly if a child leaves the room, the mother will automatically, where did my child go? And if a child suddenly doesn't see the parents, the child will look for the parents, at least after a while. But on that day, nobody looks for nobody. Everybody is concerned about themselves. So you can imagine how, I think parents will be able to relate with it more better, how dreadful that day would be. Like you're completely not at all concerned about your child. And you're only concerned about yourself. So there are no relationships on that particular day. Nobody cares for anybody else. They only care about themselves. So that is why God says, and fear a day when a father cannot help his own child, nor a child can help his father. Certainly God's promise is the truth. So this tells us that why we should never be distracted by this worldly life. Because there's something that God has promised. He has promised that there will be a judgment day where everyone will be held accountable. That's why God says, therefore, do not be distracted by this life. Do not be distracted from God by mere illusions. So this worldly affair or this worldly life is just an illusion. Your relationship with your child, a father's relationship with a child's relationship with a father is also an illusion. The reality is on the day of judgment. That's when these relationships are completely goes out of the window. Nobody cares about anyone. So that's the reality. What you have here, what you experience here, is merely an illusion. In Surah 35 verse 5, God says, O people, God's promise is the truth. Therefore, do not be distracted by this lowly life. Do not be diverted from God by mere illusions. Again, God is teaching us in Surah 35 verse 5 that His promise is the truth, and therefore do not be distracted by this lowly life. God is calling this life a lowly life. He's not even giving it any significance. God says it's very lowly. So why does God say that? Why does God say that it's a very lowly life? Because there's a much better life in the hereafter, which is much more greater than this life. Yet majority of us are distracted by this world. We are also distracted by our material possessions, relationships, our wants and desires. Whereas God says you're wasting your time here by being distracted from me. This world is of only any use to people who are not distracted from God, from their true purpose. So that is why God is calling this a lowly life. God is telling us that there's a much better life in the hereafter. Therefore, stay focused, stay on your purpose. And our purpose is to devote ourselves and submit ourselves to God alone. In Surah 63 verse 9, God says, O you who believe, do not be distracted by your money and your children from remembering God. Those who do this are the losers. So here God is teaching us that our money and our children can be cause for being distracted. These are also material possessions, and God says that we should not allow such blessings. Money, wealth is a blessing, children are a blessing. God says that we should never allow them to be a cause for us not remembering God. And God calls such individuals who are distracted by money and their children as losers. Those who do this are the losers. Tubul Allah. Alhamdulillah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah. Praise be to God. I bear witness that there is no God but God, and He has no partners. In Surah 616, God gives us many examples in various verses of how people get diverted or distracted from the path of God. It says, if you obey the majority of the people on earth, they will divert you from the path of God. They follow only conjecture, they only guess. So here God is saying that if you look at what majority of the people are doing and you try to follow them, God says very clearly that they will divert you from the path of God. Because most people have a tendency of doing things what everybody is doing. Everybody is following this particular trend. Everybody is doing this. Everybody is following this particular ideology. So let me just follow what they are doing. God says that if you obey the majority of the people on earth, they will divert you from the path of God. They follow only conjecture. They only guess. In Surah 6 verse 153, God says, this is my path, a straight one. You shall follow it and do not follow any other paths, lest they divert you from His path. These are His commandments to you, that you may be saved. So here again God gives us another way as to how to stay focused on our path without being diverted. He says, this is my path, a straight one, you shall follow it. So how can we not be distracted by this worldly life? Is by following God's path, the path that He has shown us. You shall follow it and do not follow any other paths. If you follow any other path other than what God has shown you, you will be distracted. You will be absorbed by this material world. Because all of that is just conjecture and guesswork. That is why you see the majority of so-called religious people are so absorbed in this worldly life. They are after money. Churches and many masjids and so-called charitable, it's all about money. Many religious groups, it's all about money and material possessions. These are His commandments to you, that you may be saved. In Surah 7, verse 146, God says, I will divert from my revelations those who are arrogant on earth without justification. Consequently, when they see any kind of proof, they will not believe. And when they see the path of guidance, they will not adopt it as their path. But when they see the path of straying, they will adopt it as their path. This is the consequence of their rejecting our proofs and being totally heedless thereof. So here God is saying that certain individuals who are arrogant on earth, they will be diverted away from God's revelations. And God says this is a consequence of their rejecting our proofs and being totally heedless. It means they don't listen to God's message. And thus what happens is that when the truth is shown to them, they will not follow. When they see the path of guidance, they will not adopt it as their path. Why is that? Because they are fully absorbed in this material world. They have people to please, they have people to follow, they have material things to gain. So obviously God's path is all about the hereafter and very less about this world. Of course you gain support and happiness, contentment in this world, but the greater happiness and joy and contentment is coming in the next life. But people who are absorbed in this material world are least bothered about it. They want it all here and only here. They don't want it anywhere else. They don't believe in anything else. So such individuals, God says, when they are shown the path of guidance, they will not take it. If you observe everyone who rejects submission after seeing it, you can see there's something material that is keeping them. It's either the people, it's either society, it's either my husband, my wife, child, my society, my parents. It's either one of these reasons they bring up to reject submission. So Another verse where God tells us is there, and this is in Surah 13, verse 33. God says, "Is there any equal to the one who controls every single soul? Yet they set up idols to rival God. Say, name them. Are you informing him of something on earth that he does not know? Or are you fabricating empty statements? Indeed, the schemes of those who disbelieve have been adorned in their eyes. They are thus diverted from the right path. Whomever God sends astray can never find a guiding teacher." In Surah 14, verse 30, God says, "They set up rivals to rank with God and to divert others from His path. Say, enjoy for a while, your final destiny is hell." So in this verse, God says that those who set up idols besides God and try to divert others from the path, why they are doing it? They are doing it for enjoyment in this world. That's why God says, enjoy for a while. Your final destiny is hell. So people, as you can see, people who are always diverting others from the straight path, people who are not adopting the straight path, they are all distracted by this worldly life. That is the core reason why they do it. They have something in this world to hold on to. If they truly believed in God, they would never reject the truth. They will be very concerned about adopting the truth and following the truth. In Surah 20, verse 16, God says, "Do not be diverted therefrom by those who do not believe in it, those who pursue their own opinions, lest you fall." In Surah 22, verse 9, God says, "Arrogantly he strives to divert people from the path of God. He thus incurs humiliation in this life, and we commit him on the day of resurrection to the agony of burning." So these verses are telling us the nature of people who are distracted by this worldly life. This is what they will do. If you are distracted, God says they will divert people away from God's revelation because they don't truly believe in it. Those who pursue their opinions, they will follow their own opinions. They will not follow what God has revealed. They will follow their own opinions. And they will be arrogant. He strives to divert the people from the path of God. And the result of such individuals, what they get at the end is humiliation in this life, and they are committed on the day of resurrection to the agony of burning. So this is very clear in these verses that we should remain focused on our worldly purpose, which is to never be distracted from remembering God, which is to submit and worship God alone at all circumstances, and never be completely distracted by our worldly possessions such as money, children, and many other things. So may God guide us in making sure that we are not distracted from the purpose of our existence, which is to worship God alone, and always remain on the path of submission. Salah.